I know. Yeah. I know. Okay, just want to make sure, but we're driving out and I'm looking.
Really good.
I've never.
How bad?
But I was looking. They mow, they should mow. Oh, they overgraze. I was just looking, and it's amazing. He doesn't do cookies that you can tell, you know.
Shannon, this is great.
At it. You know, but I never thought about it before. So I learned a little bit of something. So.
Yes, you're welcome.
Yeah. So weird, we drive it out and I'm like, they shouldn't be mowing. And then this other is like, they mow with grace. You can tell. And my husband's just looking like, what? Look. I shouldn't have done it. Oh, I know. It's amazing. You know, I've never thought about the prayer. Yeah. Carefully up in here. Oh, gosh.
Much easier to just.
I really, right, I realized I didn't have that.
Got your first name. Sure. Not you. I know you were. I don't remember Charlie.
Well, I think you got.
That I like to go down there and see. And we were there like 2 weeks ago. We were there last weekend. And I had, we had changed vehicles. And I
Now you're like.
We were in a vehicle, and I turned out and started walking down. And I looked up the signs, not on the door, nothing. So I thought, okay, we're gonna chance it, we're gonna go in, you know, but be ready. Exactly. Sorry. They were very strict.
Because they're not supposed to be in trouble.
Somebody wants to wear a shoe.
Yes. I don't mind. So the other thing is.
Yeah, I know. And most of them all, I teach, you know, and a lot of times if I'm presenting a math system, okay, because they can't,
Although I'm not, I've never had one myself.
but then I pull it back up, and, but then they don't have to wear it. Yeah, they're down sometimes. I want to say. That on. Not at all. Yeah. It's not just you take that, you know.
I've never.
Yes. There's so many of them all the time.
How long the breeders.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
They are there by Saturday. I need a job, so.
Yeah.
She's good with kids. Yeah.
I know, that's how I feel in the summer. I'll tell you what, after summer, that works.
Yeah, very good. So it's hard to.
Because I just gradually start staying up later and sleeping later for 3 months. And then, on my feet, I like.
I'm very.
But it helps, it really helps. And
How are you?
I have issues anyway, I sit too much, I get, you know.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
I'm-
That's your.
Yes, yes.
She's in
Yes,
there.
my main deal, yes. 7 o'clock.
That's great.
Just about that.
I'm sorry, I'm begging my husband to start Tampa Club on
Make
Thursday.
it 2 weeks and then your body
Instead
will
of being here,
adjust.
No, Thursday.
Thursday, I thought Thursday.
Is there
There's the
something?
master
Meetings?
meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Big-
Yeah, I'm gonna just take him to the council club. He needs to get out of the house. He's turning into a big bear. And he doesn't have any sunlight or people activity. He's works at home. So he tends to stay in the basement. So I told him I'm dragging him out Thursday. We're gonna start doing camera club. Twice a month. Yeah, he loves the camera.
Pictures.
Yeah. A lot of the Audubon pictures that are on our website. Pete Arnold took the really good ones. Those are all Pete's. Yeah, Pete's are amazing, but I do have to admit since I'm way faster. Post stuff, flowers and beans and stuff up there when he gets something.
For about 5 more weeks. Yes, I know. I'm thinking about it. Good try, good try.
I know, I get it.
Okay, well, thank you for answering my question. That was all my concern. I realized I missed some really good- Which might happen.
Yeah, really. It is not. My husband and I watched it last night, and I immediately got this class. And I actually sent it to my garden of 1,000 bees.
Thank you for bringing the cookies.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
Yes, and it's amazing show.
You're funny, so do not make me take any home tonight.
So is the owl in the way? For those of you who are right here, is the owl in the way?
I had no idea. I can't hear her with her mask on. It's the first time. She has a soft voice anyway. So I shouldn't make any disparaging comments.
My fiance did. He's enjoying the civilian life a little too much now for his jacket. Oh, yeah. We have an English bulldog to get the survey. Oh, yeah.
Not in the text. I didn't think so.
No, yeah, they definitely. Have you seen the one with the
Oh, yes, yes.
She said.
It's so fast, it's amazing. Yeah, for a bulldog, I was very surprised.
Oh.
But I will tell you that this one.
I've already printed it.
As much as you could.
Yeah.
But she says she'll be giving me.
Yeah. We just had a look at fix on dry lake and you would never know the difference. He still runs around and tries to pass with you
I
and
thought
all
it
that.
might have been on another website. I thought I might have seen it once or twice, but previous.
Oh, yeah, some of them are, there's some. you can go beyond. And then there's some, there's a lot of extensions. But not everything. Not the Zoom is a little harder to go through. Because it's a really rather than a PowerPoint, but like you said, you can print it.
Yes, I like books rather than Kindle. Yeah.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to class. We have cookies tonight, compliments of Sharon, so I appreciate that. It's a nice little treat. And she's advised that she does not want to take any of them home. So tonight's class is on season extension, which is kind of a really broad term that covers high tunnels, hoop houses, unheated greenhouses. So it's a big term. It's kind of an umbrella term with a lot of other things that fall underneath it. Kind of in a really broad sense, the definition of high tunnels or hoop houses. They resemble traditional plastic covered greenhouses but use a different set of growing technology. In their purest form, they are considered non-permanent structures. They lack electrical service or automated ventilation or heating systems. Tunnels are typically covered by a single layer of plastic and can use season extenders in cold climates or protection in warmer climates. How many of you have got a high tunnel or greenhouse or something? Okay. These two. So this is my high tunnel, and it's planted. It took a while to get it up, because it comes in a box with some instructions. And so my husband's an electrical engineer, and I handed him this puzzle and said, "Can you put my high tunnel up?" So he did, but he wasn't real zippy about it. So it didn't get planted till the second week of June. So the second week of June, a lot of people would just sort of say, "Well, I'll grow lettuce or peas or something." But this is what it looked like the first week of July. It's still looking a little on the puny side. It's a little small. And then you can see where it looked like the last week of August. So not only can a high tunnel extend the season, but it compresses the season. So things grow faster. They also grow taller because they're stretching for the light. So you see that hanging there? Those are watermelons. So I try to grow as much of my vegetables up as possible. I don't let them sprawl. So if it's a vining plant like cucumbers or watermelon or winter squash, tomatoes, all of it up. And so what you see there is flexible cattle panels. I see some of you guys go, "Oh yeah, I know what those are." So a flexible cattle panel is about 16 feet long. It's about 48 inches tall. And it's just metal rods that have been welded together. And so there's like 4-inch spacings, more or less. This stuff is flexible. So what I do is I tie some twine to the bottom to one side of it, and then I walk it over and I tie it together so I form an arch like that. So I grow everything up. And then I can grow stuff underneath those. So my plants that like it a little bit cooler, with moisture, my spinach, my arugula, my lettuces, those guys get to grow underneath that. Basil
and more basil. I don't know what I was thinking. Carrots.
You really like pesto?
I made a lot of pesto. I'm sure my husband was like, what the heck? This is the third week of September. Now you can see how big those watermelons are. Artichokes. Basil was up to here. Lots of it. I had all sorts of different flavors. Carrots, watermelon, whole beans, cucumbers, peppers, and then the tunnel of tomatoes.
Catherine, do you recall the thickness or the ply of the plastic covering sheeting?
And we will get to that.
Sorry. I withdraw the
I
question.
have samples of it in it. Yeah.
You call that a tunnel, but on the far end, you have thin clothes.
Oh, yeah, you have to. You have to. Otherwise, the wind gets going through there and wants to pick it up. But we'll talk about some of the construction to hold it to the ground.
So this is a dumb question because obviously I can see that it doesn't, but the watermelons don't get too heavy and like fall, that they are strong enough to hold them up in the air.
So I took valentine and they like rolling nets
Oh, okay.
and tied them up. And they grew in amongst the valentines, so they weren't round anymore, they were kind of lumpy. My neighbor, who was very inspired, decided to do the same thing the next year, but he went down to Goodwill and bought very large drawers.
That's ingenious.
Oh,
dear. That's funny.
Whatever works, right? So my goal is to be able to grow vegetables cheaper than what I can buy them at the grocery store. So I don't use electricity. And so air circulation in there gets to be a huge challenge, huge. So we'll talk about how to control that. But the stuff that you can grow in there is phenomenal. It's very magical. But it has a totally different set of growing rules. So this is what I pulled out. I sat there and I looked at this tonight. And I decided that it actually, you know, it was the first year in there, but it wasn't very good numbers. That's actually the tomatoes, 100, almost 200 pounds. Now, you know, a couple of years after I started doing this, that should be like 400 to 600 pounds of tomatoes coming out of there. And just phenomenal numbers. Yep. 260 pounds of cucumbers. I was going up and down my neighborhood. Watermelon, I got 18 fruits for 67 pounds. And so as I harvest stuff out of my vegetable garden, I keep track of what I harvest. And that way I know that's something that's worth growing again next year, that it produced to my expectations. And then I keep track of things like the flavor profile. You know, and there's some stuff that I just won't grow again because it just didn't taste good. So you have to keep track of it. And your soil is going to create a flavor that's going to be unique to what you're growing. So just because I grew something, I didn't like it, you could grow it, it would be just amazing. So keep track of flavor profiles. So planning your greenhouse. So what are you going to be growing? What do you want to grow? Want to grow the whole produce aisle? That's very cool. So when I set that one that was in the slides was actually my second high tunnel. And I staked it out, I measured it, and I remeasured it, and I would stand in the middle of it. And at first it was overwhelming because it just felt so huge. So I would move it, I would rearrange it. So I staked it out, I stood in there to make sure that I liked it. In your water quality, you have your water tested, especially if you live out in the county. If you live in town, that's just a short call to the Board of Public Utilities, and they'll tell you right away what the water is. But in the county, it can be kind of a bit more of a wild card. My water is tested out at a pH of 7, my EC is low, and my NPK is also pretty low. So that's good, that's what I want. And then what, people question, David?
Oh, I was just wondering, what are you testing the water for?
I want to know what the NPK is, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. I want to know what the pH is, and I want to know what the salts are, the EC, the electric conductivity of the water. I want to know what that salt load is. Any construction methods? Do you want to look at pictures and make your own? I've run into a lot of people who've done that. Go through a catalog and buy a kit, and then style of greenhouse. There's a lot of different styles out there for you to choose from. And then you've got to come down to what kind of covering do you want? It's got to withstand the test of Wyoming, right? The wind, the snow, gone through a few hailstorms, the hail just bounces off. The little guys bounce off. The big stuff, well, that's off on the big hail. But so far, it's withstood hailstorms, windstorms, and I've had good luck with it in that respect.
How do they hold up in the wind? With what you have? Does the positioning of the greenhouse make any difference in relation?
Oh, yes, it's huge. It's huge. How you position your greenhouse is absolutely critical. And so I'm getting a little bit ahead. And this is going to sound a little odd. Go north, south. You want your high tunnel going north and south, and the wind hits it here, broadside, but the wind goes up and over it. If you put it so it's the other way, on this axis, the wind hits this side, and it pushes the high tunnel back and forth like this. And so that's hard to control. I can deal with the broadside, but this push from the back is just really daunting. Plus, go back to the site analysis, and my morning sun, I get a lot more morning sun this way. And I get more shade with it that way. So that north-south axis is actually ideal, you know, in your perfect world, in your perfect backyard, that's why you would put it up. North-south.
So the back wall of your tunnel is up facing north.
Yep. Yep. And that's, yeah, it's another whole lecture on building these things, construction. Oh. Different types of coverings. So this is the conundrum, greenhouse insurance. So here's kind of where we fell. Well, homeowners and ranch policy wouldn't cover it because it was a semi-permanent structure. And so they looked at it and said, well, you can just pick it up and move it. The tax assessor came out, looked at it and said, oh, it's a semi-permanent structure, I'm gonna tax you. So, yeah, I was like, really? That was a little frustrating. So plan out what you want to grow. I mean, I like growing tomatoes, I think they're fun. Even in a high tunnel, it can be hard to get those big 2-pound beefsteaks. You know, I'm still waiting in September for those guys. But this is about how much square feet they take up normally. When I plant that in the greenhouse, I pack them in 18 inches on center. So they're 18 inches apart, I grow them up and I prune them. I prune the heck out of them. And if you go into a commercial greenhouse with tomatoes, you'll see that it's just one spindle. There's no leaves on it, and it's just a spindle growing out of tomatoes. So they can be pruned aggressively hard and still produce a lot for you. Cucumbers, again, I grow those straight up on top of the trellis. Even if I'm just outside with my cucumbers, they grow up. And older. I have better quality fruit, I have less blemishes. They're less likely to be eaten by a bug that's on the ground or any other diffusibility out of my place. You have a question?
I have a question, Catherine. Did you go longer variety tomatoes then?
Oh, yeah, I love going to Armenians. So an Armenian is not a true cucumber, it's a melon. But
No,
it tastes like
I
a
was meant to
cucumber.
make tomatoes.
Oh, tomatoes?
Yeah.
Oh, I've grown the burpee. I had a juice, that canning one that's 2 pounds. And then the big German Johnsons. So
So you're more up to 75 days, tomatoes or something like that? 70
yeah,
days.
I'll even go longer. Cause I'll start really early in the high tunnel. I can start March. And so there's some tricks to do in March in a high tunnel. But yeah, you can really get that season long. Now, tomatoes don't like to be cool. That's part of the problem with the tomatoes we get in the grocery stores, that they have a long ride from Mexico, Georgia, Texas, California, pick the place. And they put them in a refrigerated truck. Well, tomatoes don't like it below 45 degrees and they get mealy. So that's why they don't taste right in the grocery stores. They've gotten too chilled. So you never put your tomatoes in the refrigerator, you leave them out on the counter. They stay warm. But yeah, I'll grow the big ones in there. Or little cherry. I try to grow it all. There's so many different varieties. It's a little time.
How about walls of water for tomatoes early
Yeah,
in a high tunnel?
yeah. And you can do that. You can use a wall of water, and I put black plastic down, even in the high tunnel. So I'm trying to heat that soil up. That's really important, is to have that soil right around 85 degrees. And then I'll put the tomato in there, a wall of water. And there's some other ways you can do that. For a while, you used to be able to get those Coleman water jugs, those blue things. Well, they don't give them away anymore. They recycle them, so you can't get them. But you can get something similar and you just put it over the top of them. You can keep your vegetables warm and cover them at night. And like I said, I started in March. I can start in March in there. Yeah. Burpee rose one is a sauce tomato that's like 2 pounds. Huge. And so that you throw that in there. The big beef steaks that are possible to grow outside of a high tunnel. You can do that in there. Yeah. Okay, so different types of greenhouse or high tunnel, hoop house, whatever you want to call them, materials that you can use. And I think I've seen just about everything out there. I've seen the wood, I've seen aluminum, I've seen galvanized steel, PVC, I've seen, I've got pictures. We'll get to see some of the stuff I've seen. And then what kind of style do you want? There's the peaked roof, Quonset style, hoop house, lean-to, Gothic. There's a whole bunch of choices to choose from. I know this sounds kind of contradictory, but the Gothic shaped ones, they're shaped kind of like that. Actually have a bigger problem with snow load and don't really seem to handle the snow load quite as well as ones that are rounded. I mean, you would think that it'd all slide off one way or the other, but I've seen those Gothic ones just really cut. Okay, so we talked about this. Zoning. You're in town, make sure that your homeowners association isn't going to have a riot when they see you put one up, make sure that it's okay. And cost of these. My data might be a little old for this year, but you can make some pretty inexpensive ones just using the PVC, around $1 a square foot. And all the way up to really fancy ones that are $15 to $20 a square foot. So it just depends upon what kind of structure you want. Do you want more permanent, semi-permanent? Not so. And then the different coverings. Every once in a while, someone will get all excited about, oh, I found a whole bunch of storm windows, glass storm windows. And it's like, you know, this is hell country. You don't want glass. You really don't. There's fiberglass. Fiberglass is flammable and it will age and yellow on you. There's our acrylic, a little more resistant to breakage, polycarbonate or Lexan, and then the polyethylene films. I have samples of all these. So the polycarbonate usually comes honeycombed. And this one has been in my office and it's turned yellow. This is what my smaller high tunnel, the ends are. And what happens is these channels get water in them and then they go algae. Not getting that out. These are the super duper heavy to stand by on the end. So I will pass those around. So I have the one tunnel with that polycarbonate, but then I also had so this was on one of my tunnels, 6 mil polyethylene, so 6 mil. And it's got to be UV protected.
You what?
UV protected, UV. You cannot buy the cheap plastic at the big box stores. It will only last you about 2 months before it breaks down. So this is, I think this is a Sunmaster 6 mil. So I had that one for a while. That doesn't last real long. Maybe, well, that lasted about 4 years. But I have a smaller high tunnel. I have 2 layers of the polyethylene on it, and it's actually lasted 15 years, which is just about unheard of. It turned milky. I finally gave up the ghost and got to be fixed, replaced. But I started to use this product called Solarig 172, and so far that has done really, really well for me. There's a lot of different products out there. The Solarig is 12 mil. You can buy one that's lighter than that. You can get 11 mil. It's just all over the place. So what you can use and what's available out there.
All that to be UV protected.
It's all got to be UV protected.
Yeah,
It's just
UV
well not
protected.
survive here.
You don't want the ultraviolet, you want to block it.
I know, it seems really
It's counterintuitive.
intuitive, but if you don't have it UV protected, it will get 4 months at the most, probably less. It will just rot that fast in the sun. Chapter? Yeah. What's that particular material? Is it polyethylene? Yeah, that's the 6 mil. And for the one little high tunnel I have 2 layers of that on there. And that's the one that lasted the longest. But it turns milky.
You're recommending 2 layers.
It's all going to block the sunlight coming in. And so what you choose is actually kind of important, and I'll cover this a little bit more. So hang on. So again, it's gotta be UV, the plastic has gotta have a UV protection on it, otherwise it fails. And there's different manufacturers out there. One of them is Tough Light, and DuPont's got one, Solar, Luminescent. And they all behave differently. So your plants behave differently underneath them. And so Cornell did quite a bit of research on it a number of years ago on which plastic either worked the best or caused more problems. And so the Tough Light, this one did let enough light in that they had decent yields, but the Tough Light IR didn't, and so you have really low yields. So the research is out there. Those are Pepper's, here's the years of Pepper studies from Cornell. And it also, that light, the way the light comes through that plastic can also impact how you fertilize. And so these plants are going to stretch. They're always going to stretch looking for the light. And so you don't want it to be so UV protected that you can't get enough light in there. But you also don't want it to mess around really badly with your NPK requirements. So it's a real balancing act. Solar did pretty well, Tough Light control. Some of the other ones not so well. The yields were really bad. I have found that using the Sunmaster doesn't seem to cause a lot of yield decrease compared to being outside. But like I said, you can compress it the growing season and extend it, and the yields are still pretty impressive regardless. Okay. So how are you going to grow in this high tunnel? Are you going to go right into the soil? Are you going to grow in raised beds, or are you going to grow in containers? Because that again determines what your yield outcomes are going to be and how well these plants grow or don't grow. If you decide to grow in containers, and this is regardless of whether you're inside a high tunnel or whether you're outside, but that I would really recommend you take the soil in a container at the end of the year, dump it out, clean that pot, take new soil, amend it with some good soil, and then just let it sit out over winter and then put it back in the pot for next year. But clean the pot, clean it really well so that you're not carrying over pathogens from one year to the next. And there might even have been an insect that crawled in there that decided to call home, and you want to get rid of that guy too. So keeping everything clean is really important. Really challenging. We talked about the water a little bit. Get it tested if you can. If you're in town, all you have to do is call the Board of Public Utilities, and they will give you a soil report. Try to go over the phone. The water in Cheyenne is really good quality. It's got a pH of around 8. So when you water your vegetable garden, whether you're inside or out, it helps to try to get a little vinegar into the system to lower that pH. And especially if you're using drip systems or soaker hose, it just really helps keep everything clogging up the emitters. And then watering. So there's, for a while though, there was one person who was really advocating, the sprinkler system should be on top and you should just spray everything. And I was like, you gotta be kidding. Because in a high tunnel, a greenhouse, whatever, you want to keep the plants on the drier side. And there's a lot of myth, especially if you've been into a botanical gardens conservatory and you walk in, the humidity just hits you. They're growing tropical plants. You know, they've got bananas in there, a whole bunch of other things, and I guarantee you they're fighting all sorts of fungal problems, probably some bugs, maybe bacteria problems. And bananas just love to get every known disease out there. So they're always fighting things, but those plants want the humidity. In your vegetable garden, you don't want that much humidity in there. You don't want to turn your greenhouse into a petri dish. So you want to keep that humidity as low as possible. And typically, because there's exceptions to everything, right? Typically, the drier your greenhouse, the healthier your plants. So that whole myth about it's got to be hot and humid is just a myth. And you're going to get into a lot of trouble if you keep it hot and humid in there. For watering methods, microtubes, drip tape, overhead sprinkler system. Again, you want to avoid the overhead sprinkler system. Microtubes, I think, are really fiddly. But if you're growing in containers, you're going to have to use microtubes. You have to monitor them and make sure that they're delivering the amount of water that they're supposed to. Just have a pretty straightforward, no frills drip system. Nothing very exotic. Filter with a pressure reducer. When it comes to drip, you have to have a pressure reducer, otherwise you'll blow the emitters out. You'll have a water feature in the middle of your garden. And then I have little valves or manifolds all the way along. And I can have them on, I can have them off, I can skip a row, I can do all sorts of things. So I give myself a lot of flexibility before I set my irrigation system up.
But that's manual. It's manual.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I get our pliers out. Because their little wing is too small, so I get the pliers out and turn it with the pliers. So all of this is manual, yeah. I'm sure you can set it up to be on an electric manifold and do it. Yeah. Okay, so this is all microtubes.
Do you just have the tail end of your drip tape folded over, or do you have it in a whole return line?
It's all dead end.
You have it all dead end.
And then I just fold the other end over, and there's little slides you can put on there. And I lose them all. I probably have 100 of them lost or rototill in. So I just take the baling twine and I tie it over.
Piece of drip tape and
Yeah, you get creative. Something blows off and you just fix it with what you have. Microtubes. So he's got his irrigation lines running along and through there. He's got some up there. And then the microtube comes along through here. He's got one poor little plant in a container down here that's absolutely drowning because it's getting too much water. And this is like a 2-year-old romaine plant that he has this high tunnel. He said it still tasted really good, so. But this is an old chicken food that he converted into his greenhouse. Okay. So growing in a high tunnel has a totally different set of rules than growing outside. And so what you know outside and growing in the soil, you cannot necessarily bring that back into the high tunnel without causing a lot of trouble. So again, if you go, I like to go directly into the soil. It's a little easier for me. I get a soil test. I don't worry about each little container. But nitrogen levels can create soft fruit, more foliage, and fewer fruit. This is still pretty true outside too. Potassium levels too low. On tomatoes, the shoulders never really get red. They still stay yellow. I really like to keep my nitrogen level about 10%. And again, I make my own fertilizer. So that just makes it, and that way I know exactly what I'm giving my plants. And I'm not relying.
Fertilizers, that the alfalfa pellet you were talking about earlier.
Yep, yep. So in a high tunnel or greenhouse, if you're having nutritional problems with your plants and the leaves are off or the fruit's not producing or something's not going on, the best thing to do is to get the leaves, middle of the plant, get the middle of the plant leaves, and send them down to CSU for tissue testing. And you can find out right away what's missing or in excess, and you can fix it right away. The problem with trying to fix a nutritional deficiency in the middle of the season is that you may not have enough time. So now you're looking for a way to apply that fertilizer with a foliar application. So you want to spray it onto the plants. And there's a bunch of really cool stores down in Colorado now that speak your language. So you can go into and say, my soil test came out on this on my tomatoes. I need a foliar spray. No, they'll go, yeah, I can help you. I don't know where they go. They got it. They got the product. So there's ways to correct the problems and get your plants back on track. Irrigation systems, pretty easy to set up. It doesn't even have to be that fancy with that unit there. So all it's doing is just, you either go around the system or you send everything through the system and it just sucks it up that way and puts it in. And foliar fertigation is really kind of a slick way to go. Okay, so cooling a high tunnel. This is another one of those myths with high tunnels and greenhouses that, trying to keep it warm in there is not the problem. I got a foot of snow on top of that high tunnel. And it was 60 degrees inside. 60 degrees. And the snow was just melting and sliding right off the top of it, which is nice. So what is your cooling system going to be? Again, I don't want to have to use electricity because that just makes those vegetables more expensive. And I'm trying to beat the grocery store prices. But I've seen a lot of greenhouses or high tunnels where they have to have the box fans in there to cool it. Most underestimate the amount of air that needs to be moved through a high tunnel. And it's really a phenomenal amount of air that's got to be moved through there. These little box fans are not enough air movement.
You're calling this the high tunnel, but how are you gonna move things through?
I'll show you. So one brief word on heating a high tunnel. It's really expensive. There's a lot of ways to kind of do it a little bit more environmentally friendly. 55-gallon drums painted black. So they pull in the heat and release it. Because that high tunnel is going to reach ambient air temperature during the night. It heats up really, really fast when the sun hits it. In fact, my little tunnel, if I'm not out there at like 8 o'clock in the morning and rolling up the sides, it can get up to well over 100 degrees in there. And that creates a lot of problems. So this creates a lot of problems too, hot house. You don't want a hot house. You don't want your high tunnel or greenhouse hot. You want it about 85 degrees. And so there's a balancing act of trying to keep that balanced. So trying to grow during the winter, it's totally doable. It's a little more challenging, and for whatever reason, you will have a lot of insect pressures. Don't know where they come from, don't know why they're there. But every high tunnel I've been in, I try to do it in the winter, it's like an aphid infestation, just sort of goes hand in hand with it. So doable, but no. Okay, what is needed in the greenhouse? I like to grow everything right into the ground, so I can, my soil test, I can add stuff, to me, it's a lot easier. Workspace area, I like to have a bench, so I can come in with my flats and set stuff down at this level instead of bending over on the ground. Place to sit. So I usually have a chair in there or a chair close by. I've been in some greenhouse and high tunnels where there's coffee maker. I have your creature comforts. So. Diseases and pests in a greenhouse, high tunnel. So I'm going to use the word greenhouse, but it stands for high tunnel food house, kind of a universal term. So this is where it's really quite the balancing act. And you've got to monitor. This is where you get to let your inner micromanager come out and run amok. Because you really have to monitor everything. I'll have, we passed one of those yellow sticky traps. Thank you, last class. I've got those at my high tunnel. I'm checking soil temperature with my little soil thermometers. I check the soil moisture. I've got feeders of all sorts. So I'm really monitoring what's going on in here. You can see here, too hot, too cold, too humid. The soil's not right. You've used the wrong fertilizer. Do not use Miracle-Gro in your high tunnel. It's the wrong nitrogen. It's just the wrong everything. It's too much nitrogen and it's the wrong nitrogen. So no Miracle-Gro. And any one of these that's in excess or not enough can really put your whole high tunnel off balance. And it is really hard to bring this back into balance. Actually, one year I got my high tunnel too dry. And I had a spider mite infestation that was just about biblical. And I ended up ripping out half the plants in there out of just sheer frustration. Yeah, it was too late. I tried to get it humid. It was too late. They were winning the war and I was losing. So when things get out of balance, trying to get them back into balance is challenging, maybe even a little frustrating.
Is there an ideal humidity that you're looking for? Like a combination of that ideal 10 of 85?
So the tomato plants like it a little bit more humid. So I'll actually take my 40 row cover and I'll set it up along the sides of them just to hold more humidity in it. And then everybody else likes it a little bit drier. Except the eggplants, which also like a little bit more humidity. They were the guys that got infested with the spider mites. So it was challenging, especially when you try to do everything in one space. It really makes it a bigger issue. So can I give you a number? That is really hard because it fluctuates so much in the summer. I can drop down to 7% here. I try to keep it at least 50% inside my high tunnel. It's neither too high nor too low. But again, my tomatoes like it about 60%. So when if you do this, you kind of learn and get to figure out what likes what. Yeah. And then there's other ways to cool it. For a while, the CSU still has their high tunnels. They're still doing research down there with them. And did you ever get to meet Frank Stonecker? I really enjoyed him. He could talk for hours on peppers, and I would just kind of go, yeah, that's cool. Yeah. But he would run water on top of the high tunnel outside. He had drip tape up on top of the high tunnel. He'd run it for 5 minutes every hour to cool, and he would be able to drop the temperature of his high tunnel just by running water on top of it on outside. And so he's also the one that advised that tomatoes like more humidity and less. So that's gonna put your eggplant in there. So those guys. So humidity. So three major problem children, fungus, bacteria, and viruses. And fungus really likes it when it's high humidity and a low temperature. So this will cause the tomatoes problems with the botrytis. And so keeping it clean and keeping that leaf litter off the ground is really important. And I was still putting that spunbound, which is so this is, remember that fabric I brought in that one class. So this is the spunbound stuff, coating row cover or Ramie. So I had that alongside my tomatoes trying to keep the humidity up. I was having problems with botrytis. That was their perfect happy place. So I really had to stay on top of keeping things clean. So if I missed a tomato, it would fall down there on the ground and sort of that. Instant botrytis. And botrytis is that fuzzy gray mold. It's kind of long and hairy. So that's actually a fairly easy one to control. But it's when the fungus gets on leaves. And that's what causes problems. So the other problem one is powdery mildew. And so your cool season plants, like your snow peas, sugar snap peas, those guys that like it cool weather. Lima beans and that whole family. They like it cool. And so as you start to get later into June and it starts to warm up, you can end up with powdery mildew on those that it just gets stressed. They don't like the heat. And so stress is usually what causes the powdery mildew to show up. And once you get powdery mildew on those plants, there's just nothing that's going to make it go away. There's no chemicals, there's no sprays, nothing is going to take care of that. So all you can do with those vegetables that have that powdery mildew is to pull them and just get rid of the plants altogether. Just throw them away. That's the end of their season, and you're going to yank them out of the ground. That's hard to do.
Does it carry over to the next year, or is it gone once you throw the plants out?
So does it carry over to the next year? It can. It can. And so that's why rotating is really important, that you don't grow the same thing in the same spot year after year. And so if you had snow peas here and you want to grow them again next year, then they go over there. You just keep that rotation. But you make sure that you really get that soil cleaned up with any debris on it and you'll leaf litter. Yeah. Yeah, that's just hard to tell people. You got to yank that plant out of the ground and throw it away. And I certainly have stood there in my high tunnel and looked at it and went, oh, but you were so good and you were so tasty. And or you can't even really compost it. You just have to put it in the trash bag. Yeah. Yeah. So you can try less fertilizer, water correctly. I mean, really, you're watering on the ground, you're not spraying the water into the air. And low humidity, increase the air circulation. So that's kind of like the number one rule in a high tunnel is increasing that air circulation. And getting the air to move through there is just so important. Bacteria. Usually, it typically comes in on the plant. So I try to grow as much of what I'm going to grow. I try to grow what I'm going to plant myself. That way I know that there's a minimum chance of pests or some sort of disease coming in with them. So bacteria gets into that plant through like a cut or nick or bruise or something on that leaf, and so that's how it comes in there. Your tools can have it. Try to clean the tools every try to clean the tools every year. And clean off all the old dirt, old bleach, solution, rinse it off. So I try to maintain some sort of protocols for sanitation. Want to avoid overwatering. And sometimes even just walking through your plants and brushing up against them can damage them enough that they can pick up on that tree. So again, there's no plant medicines for this. It's bad enough you're gonna have to pull a plant to get rid of it. I don't see this a lot. I don't see this problem very often. Normally what I see is some insect has come in and brought a disease with it. And normally it's a viral type disease. And viruses, there's no medicines for viruses. And when your tomato plants especially get a virus like the tomato mosaic virus, you can see it on the tomato, it's the fruit itself. They'll have these like concentric circles on them. They just have really weird kind of bullseye type circle, but you can't see that right there.
Is that carried by leaf hoppers?
Well, it can. There are some viruses that are carried by leaf hoppers.
In Mohana, we used to have some years where the leaf hoppers would come up from Texas and kill all your tomatoes with some kind of virus disease.
Yeah, it's usually some sort of curly top or purple top virus. And we get psyllids up here too. Those are all blown up from Texas and Mexico. Yeah, that wind shifts and away we go. So on the fruit itself, it's going to be these circles. And so I can tell you from personal experience, the tomatoes taste really good. And as you look at that tomato, you look at that plant, you go, but really you're just beautiful. But this tomato's got this thing on it. And when you eat it, it's a styrofoam ball tastes better. It's just that bad. So again, all you can do is yank the plant out of the ground, throw it away. So be really careful. If you're buying nursery stock, if you're buying your own tomatoes, or buying them from a store, just look at them very, very carefully. Make sure that they're not misbehaving in the store. Check them, turn the leaves over, look for insects. But just really, I would encourage you to grow your own, because tomatoes are easy to grow. And in the Master Garden Plant Sale, oh my God, people are crazy growing tomatoes. So the big box stores are a little apprehensive. And for a while, the fashion fad was to get tomatoes that were grafted. So you could take a tomato that wasn't as vigorous and put it on really vigorous tomato stalk. And so they were grafting these. Well, it's kind of a fad, it's kind of died down and kind of gone away. I had some tomatoes from someone that was grafting, but they were smokers. And they were like, well, no, I don't smoke when I'm doing this, but they had it on their hands. That's all it took was they had handled tobacco, and the virus was in the tobacco, they got on their hands, and it just transferred to that plant. So things move, little tiny things move, and we don't see it. That's usually what gets us. So I don't see this a lot. If we're going to see it, it's going to be close to the end of the season. Bugs. I took this picture in a high tunnel north of town. And so one little ladybug, and there's every life stage of aphids on that pepper plant possible. And so the problem here, the high tunnel was too humid, too hot, and she had just overloved the soil. Didn't do any soil test, but you know, found some azomite, wonderite, put that in there, and then got some kelp and put that in there, and she was just stirring everything in there that she could. But she just ended up with this huge insect problem. And aphids, about 4,000 different aphid species worldwide. You can use your yellow sticky cards to monitor for aphids. But I also found that some of the good bugs, like the turkey gamble wasp, also like to come and get stuck on that sticky card too. So you can do a whole entomology lesson just on a yellow sticky card in your garden. And it's just a wealth of information on that. So aphids, there's a lot of biological controls for them. Ladybugs, of course, and ladybug larvae, which don't look anything like the adults. Actually looks pretty alien, weird looking. They're actually a bigger, more voracious eater than the adult. Green lacewings. These guys are pretty cool. So I want you to start watching for this in the summer too. And I know Scott showed a slide of it. The green lacewings put their egg on a stalk. So they'll lay it on some, they'll put this stalk on a piece of wood, piece of metal. And then their eggs are up on these little like antenna things. So when you see this, these are the good guys. And then the other insect that has a really weird egg case is the praying mantis. And it kind of looks like someone sprayed foam onto, you name it, a piece of wood. Love wood, love to lay their egg cases on wood. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to draw this or not, but it kind of looks like that. And it's black yellow. And it's going to have lines like that. And you might see some holes in it. But it looks like and feels like almost like foam, like a styrofoam. Really weird texture to it. Everyone knows what a praying mantis is, right? That's like the coolest bug on the planet. It's got a head that rotates. They can look at you with big eyes, and it's like, it's really cool.
They do just flying outside, you don't want to bring them in.
No, don't bring the chicken inside.
Yeah, don't bring that inside. But then you have hundreds of every time.
I take it you speak from experience. You know, that would be entertaining and all the whole thing. Bulbera bassiana, which is a fungus. That's just talked about funguses, how you don't want them in there, but you use a fungus to go after aphids. Insecticidal soap, horticulture oil. Horticulture oil is just a really highly refined, like baby oil. Neem oil. Neem oil is derived from the azabactrin tree. And it's non-selective. Doesn't care what it kills. So it'll take out good guys and the bad guys. Mealybugs, I've had these in my high tunnel. They can be hard to control. There are other insects that will go after them. I usually just go in with the hose and try to hose them off. It usually works pretty good. There's a bunch of other bugs that will go after them. Green lacewings are kind of your dual purpose insects in there for control. You can use praying mantis in there too. I actually see these more frequently on house plants. So. thrips. Thrips are really kind of the bane of greenhouses. And it's really hard to exclude them, keep them from coming in. Somewhere in my box here. But it's almost a film. So this screen is small enough to keep thrips out. So you pass this around, and you can see how tightly woven that is. But the thrips are these little tiny things. And if you take like your eraser, you erase something, you get all the little eraser stubbles. That's about how big thrips are. They're really tiny, they're really hard to see. You've got to turn the leaf over to find them. They'll cause puckering of a leaf, they'll pull the cytoplasm out, they'll take the innate chlorophyll. So they're really damaging insect. They do transmit viruses. So they're another kind of one that could be not so happy. High tone. Blue sticky cards, they like the color blue. And so kind of like the color of some of the surgical masks. That's the color blue they like. Yep. They are just about resistant to every insecticide out there. Right up there are spider mites. There really isn't anything that you can use on them because they're pretty resistant. So trying to exclude them is one way. Just the other thing is, it really comes down to how are you managing those plants? Are you overloving them with too much fertilizer? Sneak that miracle in. And then increase your airflow. There are times you can just blow them out. Blow something else, but no. White flies, once you get white flies in a greenhouse situation, are really difficult to get rid of. It's really, really hard. Yellow sticky cards to monitor for them. There's a parasitic wasp that you can use that will go after them. I've never had white fly problems, so I've never tried the aluminum foil. And insecticidal soaps will work too. So Sabre soap will work on them. But that's an ongoing battle with these guys. And fungus gnats, we've talked about these guys. Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis BTI takes them out pretty well. BTI also works on black flies, midges, mosquitoes. So it's one of the good bacteria in our arsenal. Again, it comes down to keeping plants a little bit on the drier side and kind of reducing the amount of algae that's growing in the soil. Spider mites. And these guys are resistant to just about every insect out there. The insecticides that are left are just so awfully bad that you don't want to handle them. If you like it drier, so raising that humidity helps get rid of them. The year I had them in my high tunnel, I kind of just pulled the plants that were infected by them and just got rid of them. I don't have that this year, but it was not a lot of options. I tried water, I tried spraying, and we tried upping the humidity and everything. I even went so far as to get an oscillating sprayer and put it in with the plants, so it was doing this and pouring water all over the place. And it still didn't do it. It didn't slow them down at all. So there's also a predatory mite. But the trick with this predatory mite is that the spider mite likes it drier, but the predatory mite likes it more humid. And you have to know like a month in advance that you're going to get spider mites in order to get the predatory mite. So it's a really just not a lot of insecticides that are labeled for greenhouses. So you've got to go into that integrated pest management toolbox and start looking at the least toxic solution, which is pretty much just open up your high tunnel and get the air flowing through it. And then if it comes down to it, neem oil, but again, neem oil is non-selective. So some rules. Increase air circulation and decrease the humidity. So when there's a problem, insect problems, or you're just not sure, you want to increase the air circulation and decrease the humidity. And sanitation in a greenhouse is everything. And I have been in some greenhouses and high tunnels where, you know, I really felt I needed to take my shoes off. And it was just that clean. It's like, oh my gosh, do you vacuum in here? And it was marvelous. So don't leave dead plants. Don't let the weeds grow. That's a really hard one. Don't let the weeds grow because you feel like that's all you do all summer. Make sure that your tools are clean. And again, grow your own plants that are going to go in there. They're so easy to start. Whether it's an artichoke or a tomato or a pepper, okra, whatever you like to grow, they're all really easy to start from seed. So how many of you here do grow your own vegetable plants from seed? Okay. And of course, inspect those plants before they go in. If you buy it from a store, you know, turn them upside down and look at them because those insects hide underneath the leaf, not on top of the leaf where you can see them. They don't want to be found. You want to stay in that shady area. So look underneath that leaf, turn the plant upside down and look at it. I'll even sometimes go as far as to pull a plant out of the little pot to check to see what's going on in the soil.
No, Mary. Mow your prayer. Don't look.
Yeah. Okay. And then, despite telling some people not to do this, to put manures into their high tunnel, soil direct, I have had a few people do that. And it's like, well, why not? It works outside, sort of. And so what happens, again, manures aren't high in nitrogen, but they're very high in salts. And so it gets rototilled in, and that salt load is huge because you don't know, unless you get that manure tested so you know what the NPK is, and you don't know how much to add, right? You're guessing. So I had a number of people just sort of guess, put down too much, and so what happens is when you water, is all this salt is up in the red zone. So to get rid of that salt, you've got to water and water and water and push that salt below the red zone. But that takes gallonage. That's a huge amount of water. And I don't think you can actually give the soil enough water to push that salt below it. But what happens is you don't get it deep enough. And then you go back in and you water just enough for that plant that pulls that salt back up. And so as soon as that happened in this one particular high tunnel, I got a phone call and said, my soil is all sparkly. You guess what that is? and so you're looking at, and to pull that soil out, you know, dig that soil and get rid of it, or pick up your high tunnel and move it. And I've known some people that have picked their high tunnel and moved it. I've known several people that have done that. There's friends out in the Carpenter area where I live, and they got manure from the feedlot. They put that manure in their high tunnel, and rototilled in, and the problems were just phenomenal. Just phenomenal. The plants were blistering and turning yellow and producing. They were wilting, and some of them were let's take a break. Let's take about a 10-minute break. Cookies. Go get some cookies. Shannon doesn't want to take cookies home.
And you want to be on the phone?
I do, but
After doing all this, it seems like it's a full-time job.
I know.
Just by
But I
myself.
can't do it. I'm doing some traveling. Got April in town, March in December in town, so I have people in town.
This does look like a huge impact.
Yeah, I'll see-
I-
I'll see if we can on that. Some kind of trellis.
Catherine, I guess you don't watch this episodes, but when you had talked about the person grafting the tomatoes, there's an episode of The Simpsons where he makes tobacco, which is literally tobacco tomato combination. They want to make the whole town like obsessed with them. They're all in there. I was like, tobacco is real.
Oh my God.
I tried to go back.
I love it.
You do, okay, well, that's part of it.
So, the tobacco seeds, you ever found tobacco?
That sounds pretty exciting, but boy, that's, I looked at that and I'm like, okay, between the time you put them and the expensive materials, I'm not sure for the few, we eat vegetables, but there's just a tool, so. I didn't think it was worth it.
Whatever I go, I'll get the other families too.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's just it, I'd have to do a real in-depth head training to see
So I thought, oh,
it's worthwhile.
Would your neighbor?
I think so. It's an impermanent structure that everybody put up in the So,
Are you and this considered renters? Because that's where the hail seems to go.
I know, that's why I was
Yeah,
saying,
you get
what's
lots of that.
for the service? I got to use it, so. No, we can place our. Then you need to. So we need a bit more.
We looked at the thing this morning,
And
we saw
a
it.
few years ago.
You're my dog, right?
no,
I go, yes, okay, we're good, right? I'm like, yes.
Right up to our. And then a year later, we got another one.
You guys get it all the time. It almost seems like there's a weather map. That Cheyenne has one weather and Ranches area and more has another.
I don't know if we could change the airflow patterns.
Well, the next part is, if since you're a physician, you like research, you like to do thorough research. So, that you're going to take
I
out.
know, there's so much.
So much could be very.
Okay.
But
I want to be
it would
outside.
be familiar.
Yeah.
The scale, what she's, oh no, that was
You know, yeah, I was gonna take a nap.
Yeah, I can imagine what 5 to 6 hundred. I mean, if you were selling it to farmers market, I get it, but it's not. I'm excited for you, that's great. I have a really dear friend who's retired. She sold her home. She moved in for a little while with her sister, and she's buying and doing work on a whole volunteer system of where the National Wildlife Refuges have volunteer positions where they'll let you site RV on their property, give you water and I guess and dump station and all. And you live there for like 2 months and you work 3 days a week and then the rest of the time is your time off. No pay.
Right.
But
Someplace to stay.
she sold her home and that's what she's gonna do. So now she's in the process of researching our houses. 'Cause with the pandemic and all the shortages, it's been a bit of an issue, but staying in her sister's house works out great for her. She's good with it. Her sister's good with it.
The arguments are perfect because you're taking your hotel.
Right.
You don't
Yeah.
have to stay in a hotel room.
We can't believe she's done it. I mean, that's, of all the other people that have retired that I know, she's the one that is like, she's going really and doing some amazing stuff. So it's wonderful. So this is my retirement gift. from one of my-
I'm out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. This is from my best girlfriend. And it actually was. Well, this is exciting. I'm enjoying it.
Me too. I went to
Oh, yeah. I bet Nancy was such a I just couldn't, I was telling Tom earlier that between this class and then I've got Audubon 2 Tuesday nights, the 3rd and the 4th. And I'm gonna start talking about this on Thursday nights. I just couldn't do another night. I needed a night home. You know, 'cause it seems like I'm home during the day. And all of my nights I'm off. And I just want to do mom and dad for my husband, so. So I had to skip that, but I emailed Nancy and I said, I'm not interested. I just can't make this. I'll probably start next month when things are so bad.
So what are you gonna do with all this other?
Well, I'm working with, volunteering with the conservation district. They're building a new building out on Capstone Road. So out here in the business park out there, and they are restoring the wetlands area. Just hearing about that.
Yes, yes. From.
Yeah, so they have a big piece of property that the, I can't remember the name of it, it's the.
Yeah, leads.
Yeah. So they've got a big piece, I think it's rented, but there's nothing you could do with it because it's got water flowing in it. And then across the street from that, on Capstone, between Capstone and Highway, there's an extension of driveway. And I was just out there yesterday, we had 2 photographers out there. And getting pictures from up here and everything else that's hanging out there. So my hobby is being outside and doing that kind of stuff. I want to learn how to restore wetlands, how to do native prairie plants. That's what, so the prairie thing that was last Wednesday was really interesting. Yeah, because that's what I'm interested in. So restoring natural areas and growing the flowers like Nancy does.
Yeah, so we'll get
real.
one thing to buy seeds, find another.
I still want to do my profession, but I also want to get outside. Yeah. Yeah, and my poor husband's not quite acclimated to me not working yet, but not that I'm a nuisance, but you know, we've been on 2 salaries for a while. That we're trying to do a one now. That's a bit of a, I don't want to start social security or pension money yet. I want it to grow a little bit more. So that's the hardest part, is trying to figure it out. I don't know. We're pretty simple people, so.
That's most of us in different ones. We have to scrap once a week. Otherwise,
I'm perfectly happy hiking in the, you know, going somewhere in an hour a year. And so many beautiful places. But yeah, it's so different. I'm learning to get used to it. Some days, couple days, I've been a little down because I miss working. I miss the professional part. I miss the expertise of knowing something that well and being in charge of something. But I think that's been a perpetual thing, over the years.
I'm sure that's the case.
Yep, yep.
The skin was fine.
One every.
Yeah, and I'm like, and it was on the vine of like 2 weeks. I'm like, I've never seen that in a recent before. I'm like, well, that's to be my organic. So I was like, really, and I need to see them with like holes or something. Because it was
And one of the biggest problems so the spotted drink is not so late, so when raspberry or blueberry or strawberry, and they have all comes out of and then it has passion, all the little
we were like this.
Everybody said that. Everybody in our house.
I know I'm not doing it. And I was like, it's just that. I'm not organic for me. I'm like, this is organic.
My husband is of our son.
It's like, and like, somebody.
I'm not.
And like, while all that work. Yeah, these are all today.
everybody grab a cookie? There's still cookies left over.
No one leaves.
Right.
Just lock the doors.
No one leaves until the cookies are done.
So grab a cookie, or 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Here we are. Waiting.
Okay, so as I traveled around, I do take pictures of what I find. So it can be a little bit entertaining at times. But this kind of goes back to your earlier question about using walls of water in a high tunnel. But yeah, by all means, I've seen people start February using walls of water or some type of a quote. And so in this case, they just used one layer of plastic bottles, cut the bottoms off and put it over the plant to make like a greenhouse in a greenhouse. So you can do that to kind of extend the season even more. And so at night you can come along and just cover the whole thing with your floating roll cover or an old sheet just to kind of keep that heat in there. Really great way to start seeds in. So it's good for seed starting. You just you can, so the master gardeners can be very creative on how they do things. And I've got a master gardener who puts Christmas tree lights in here, the old ones. And he's for a little pie time, a little greenhouse for Christmas tree lights. Yeah. Okay. It's, I'm sure I got it here. It's just it's like a plastic circle, long, and it's got tubes. So if you look at it from the top, it's got all these channels in it that you fill with water. And when you look at it from the side, it's like this. Like a little thing. And your plant goes in here.
The water freeze, the plants, all that.
I've never had, really, I've never had that happen, but that's.
Well, not completely, but
Yeah,
it froze.
oh, yeah,
I've had the plants cook on the inside during the day.
yeah,
It was okay in the morning and gave them some more.
so,
Or the wind blew them over and crushed them.
yeah, here it's gonna be, the wind's gonna blow it over and crush the plant. But I usually take a pepper cage and put it in there,
Oh, that's a good one.
so I'll have my pepper cage. And that way it holds it open, so it doesn't fall over with the wind, because all it takes is for one of those channels to dump the water, and then the whole thing goes with it.
I
And then I'll
use
cover,
wooden valves.
yeah, you can get creative with trying to keep it up. Yeah, but they're really good for holding the heat in, close them up at night, open them up, and you've got to be careful.
I think they all
Yeah, yeah, I've got one in my lab. Yeah, I can show you later. If you can just take, for a while, Culligan, had those water bottles for the big water container things. You can get those, cut the bottoms off and use those for poach. And they started to aggressively recycle them, and so now you can get them. But these are just like soda, big 1 liter soda bottles, bottoms cut off. They work really well. This works, you just gotta monitor it really closely. And then we're doing it on the cheap. This is a piece of flexible cattle panel that had seen better days. It probably got run over by a cow or something. And so she just took it and bent it between her fence and some shrub, some hay bales, plastic over the top of it. And she was growing watermelon under there, and she's at 7,500 feet. So, yeah. Yeah. So this is a raised bed with little low tunnels on it. And this is more that spunbound, that lamey. And so this is a exclusion method. So he's trying to keep the bugs out. He's growing potatoes in there, and he's trying to keep the Colorado potato beetle out. Which, once you see one, you'll never forget what it looks like. Yeah.
So I get the high tunnel concept of it, and I know you like bugs and stuff for the pollination and all that jazz. Do you just leave the door open and your butterflies and bees come in and out, or is it just those plants that don't need that?
So we'll get to that, but
Sorry.
I know. But the air circulation in there is really, really critical. And I'm going to show you some designs that don't work and why. Again, this is more bug exclusion, but you could put plastic over there for early in the season and start some of your salad greens in there and do some other stuff. But he's just growing potatoes in there, trying to keep the bugs out. So
Is that grown in Cheyenne, Wyoming?
Yeah,
With the wind,
yeah,
you get that kind of growth inside?
yep. Keep in mind, vegetables are not drought tolerant. So you've always got to be putting the water to them. So just when you think, oh, it's got enough, you need to add a little more. Yeah. But everything I'm going to show you tonight is here in Cheyenne. Yeah, Laramie County.
If we're talking about extended season, I was talking about maybe a starting February or March and end in October or.
You can certainly start. I've known people to get their tunnel planted in late February and have nice growth on stuff come April, May, and actually start harvesting at the end of May. But they're on top of it. It takes a lot more micromanagement. And then you can go all the way to December, and there's been a couple years where I've gone year round in my hard tunnel. Yeah. But yeah, like I said, you can extend the season. You can make it 6 months. But the beauty with that high tunnel is you can compress that season even more and get a lot of growth out of something in a short period of time. But it takes some management because you can't treat it the same way you do an outside vegetable garden. Okay. Quite a few master gardeners have got these. We put the milk house heaters in there. And so it comes on like this at a certain temperature. It goes off at a certain temperature. They put Christmas tree lights up to keep it warm in there. But they'll start seedlings in there and they'll grow vegetable starts in those. But this one, I found was in Sam's Club and I looked at that and I was like, oh my heck, you gotta be kidding. And I had little tiny tent stakes for it.
Bye.
Of course, you know, I can't resist, so I have to go inside the thing, right? So there I am, I'm standing there looking at it going, you gotta be kidding. And lo and behold, another master gardener walks up and waves to me. So he and I had this lively discussion inside of this thing, what you could actually do with it. And then I saw someone that bought one out and it was in their backyard and it only lasted one season. And it's like, it's just too lightweight. It's just, we figured it would be great in a basement to do stuff like orchids and African violets.
Catherine, was that around the $300 price tag? I can't quite read it.
Yeah, it's 305.
The other one was like 150 something. I'm
Yeah,
just
the other
curious.
one was like $160.
Yeah.
This is $305 and a penny. Really. Only cents. So, again, this is all Laramie County. This is all what I have found here. And this is a 7,500 feet. This is a homemade one with just wood and fiberglass siding. So just common stuff that you find at the big box stores. She's got a fan up here, doors wide open. And then the air circulation comes out the back where she pulls it through. It's barely enough air circulation in it, barely enough. But this little greenhouse was one that I walked into and I was going, should I take my shoes off? It was just so clean in there. And she was doing everything hydroponically, which is a whole different ballgame. Very successful, very, very successful. She was easily getting like 20 to 30 pounds of fruit off of each one of those tomato plants in there. Yeah, she was really pushing it. They're producing for her. Okay. This is another kind of I call these fad greenhouses. It's yeah, I want a greenhouse, but I'm not really committed. And so they got it put up, and then the wind started to shake it apart. So they took it and silicone glued it all together. Then they started to screw it together. Then there's one little vent back here that it pops open. And there's some roof vents. Well, when I walked into that, even with the roof vents, it was way too hot to grow anything in there. But the roof vents had gotten ripped off from the wind. And they never found the roof vents. Yeah. So, and I know this wasn't cheap. But if you're gonna do one of these, make sure that it's gonna be able to withstand Wyoming. And it's not just sort of the, you know, casual backyard. Unless you've got a really protected backyard. Hey, this is Claire. He lives west of Cheyenne. And he's the king of overbuild. And he's got a big bench right there. And then he's got another vent back there. It still wasn't enough air circulation. So he made windows. And it still wasn't enough air circulation. But you can see, I mean, this was another one where I walk in and I'm kind of going, so he's going to put his shoes on. So neat, tidy, clean. Oh my gosh. He had gotten power poles, and so he lined all the power poles with this white plastic. Then he filled the beds with soil. Then on top of this, he put black landscape fabric, and then he put all his summer squash in there. But it was just immaculate. It was absolutely immaculate. And yeah, it's 175 pounds of winter squash and 300 pounds of summer squash. 300 pounds of zucchini.
So Catherine, going back to the previous slide, you said there still wasn't enough air circulation. So how would you fix that? I mean, what do you do? He's got open windows. He's got front and back vents.
I would never do one this style. I would go this style.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's, you know, and how does he secure these in the winter? You know, this is almost impossible. So he's got to put in some sort of header up in there and get everything tacked down, and then make it more windows, more air circulation going in there. Yeah. But he was having fun, and and he built this using chain link fence steel. So these are all chain link extensions. And it's not going anywhere. It's just not.
Yeah, that's overkill.
Well, okay, so this is his other greenhouse, and this was an old outbuilding. He took all the siding off, and then he put plastic on. Still having problems with air circulation, so he's cutting in windows. Got a big door, he's got a vent. And he's actually quite successful using these. And, you know, I had the 2-year-old romaine plant. And peas and all sorts of stuff growing in those. It's very, very impressive. There's an old chicken coop, sides off. But that outbuilding that's sitting out there, you're looking at going, I should just tear it down. Just tear the sides off and put plastic on it. This is how he waters, it's all microtubes. And again, it's fiddly because some plants don't get enough and some get too much, so you really have to monitor it. This poor thing was just floating in water, you know, and its neighbor over there was dry. So you really micromanage it. There was his heating system. He had underground, so he had PVC pipe underground, and he had all these drums, black drums. And so it's just a very passive system going through with warm water. It's just heating the soil. It's actually a very smart way to do it. So the heat just rose up. Instead of trying to blow the heat down or blow the heat around, it's just sort of passively rose. That was very cool. Okay, this is just north of Cheyenne, this is up on Yellowstone. It's kind of north. And these slide open. So there's 3 windows down there that she can slide open. It's still not enough air circulation in there. It's too hot. And so she's got a shade cover. And shade covers come in colors. So this is one that's white. And the other side is black. And so you want the white side up. And they come in silver, and they come in different leaves. So it's all over the place. I don't know how much of it's cool. Got a water system in there. She has a phone in there. That was important to her. Different lighting systems, bottom bench. Got some house plants in there. And one little area where she could do in-ground, but mostly just some potting benches. And then for winter, she has the black water drums. Okay, this is a Gothic style one. And this, you wouldn't think this, but there was the same year that I had like a foot of snow on top of my high tunnel, they had that same up there. And it tore that plastic all to pieces. Just collapsed it. So again, a lot of electricity here, it's got big vents. And all of these windows and doors open up. So she's not getting enough air circulation in there. It's very, very challenging. It looks like inside, and another big window and a door. There's 2 vents over there that come open. So anytime you've got to have those electric vents and air circulation in there, it's really, really noisy. Like definitely, like unpleasant to be in there type noise. Well, she got a lot of produce out of that fight, a lot. Okay, processing. Yeah, this is just one of the methods. She kept changing. Every year she changed it up and do something different. Different way to grow in there. And then this is the greenhouse with the most amazing view I've ever seen. And it's about 7,800 feet. And it started off life as a lizard house, something terrarium. No, this whole thing, it starts with an H, herpetarium. Yeah, it was a lizard house for her kids. The kids grew up and left, so she turned it into a greenhouse. So the back wall was painted, it wasn't black, but it was like a charcoal color. And then they joked about the mezzanine section, and this right here, that's an Armenian cucumber. And so for those of you who can't or don't like to eat cucumbers, an Armenian is actually a melon that tastes like a cucumber, and they're really, really good, and they're worth growing, but they get huge. They get like that, like 28 inches long, 30 inches long. Everything was grown in containers. You can kind of see there's some problems going on there in the soil, but again, it was quite a productive little greenhouse. Very fancy. Okay. So this is that flexible cattle panel. So they made a frame, like a 2x4 frame, put it on the ground, a flexible cattle panel, stuck it inside of it. Made some ends. Again, not enough air circulation in here. So the big door on one end and a window but still not enough. So this worked out great for them in February and March and April, and then it got too hot after that. And then they also didn't put the right plastic on, they just got the cheap plastic at the big box stores. It wasn't UV protected. It only lasted about somewhere between 2 and 4 months before the season. Sun just wanted it out really, really fast. But it's a really cool idea and kind of neat way to go about doing a real inexpensive high tunnel. So, Master Gardeners being who they are, this is when it was PVC, and this is the real lightweight PVC. I think it's like 1.5 inches. So he's got this lightweight PVC. He's got one going across here as a purlin. Back opens up. Got it tacked down on the sides.
Has anybody tried rolling up the sides? Oh.
That's the answer. So it's like anything you do, you know, the first year is kind of your experimental year, and you go, well, I didn't die, no one else died. And, yeah, I'm still married. So let's try to do this a little bit better. So you put in braces on one side, the windward side, I imagine, black plastic. There's the box fan. A bench has snuck its way in there. And then by the end of the season, an Adirondack chair moved in. But he was really doing well. I mean, his tomatoes were doing great. He figured out how to make them climb up and kept them pruned, and it was pretty neat and tidy. Also a hard time, but definitely made on the cheap. If this was $1 a square foot, I'd be surprised.
So that was PVC water pipe?
Yeah. Yep. It doesn't have a long lifespan.
It was not much UV protection in the water pipe.
I haven't used protection. Okay, so my neighbor's not to be outdone. They also built one. And this is again with just PVC. So PVC's got a lot of uses. And
There
this is his
There is
construction.
UV protective paint that you can maybe paint with.
Oh, yeah, you can get colorful.
I mean, you can paint the pipe
Yeah, exactly.
with UV protective paint.
Yep, yep. So this little 4-way up there. This is, he's got it connected to the ground with just some rebar, some concrete rebar. Let's put the rebar in the ground and put PVC over the top of it. Everything's raised beds. 3 feet wide raised bed, 3 foot alley, 3 foot raised bed. PVC, kind of actually decided to work. Okay. So the irrigation system goes from bed to bed so that she could just do, I think Marion does soaker hose in here. The door down there, box fan moved in because it wasn't enough air circulation. And this was in, well, this is March. So this is March when we put this up. This is what it looked like in July. Wow. And you just absolutely needed a machete to go through this. And so there's some corn in there, tomatoes are going crazy, and there's just a ton of stuff in there, but just with, but you can see that concentration of that sun and heat and everything in there does. So it really expresses that growing season. This is a fiberglass, and it started, I think they started off their life as water tanks. And so these vents are done with beeswax so that when it gets too hot, beeswax softens and the vent pops open. And then when it gets cool, they flop back down. So that's pretty neat. And she grew, this was another master gardener, and she grew a lot of produce in here. Just shoehorned it in. I just barely had space. But very, very productive. Lots of fruit, lots of vegetables, cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, salad greens, everything. But not enough air circulation again. Okay, so now, I keep talking about air circulation, right? I love these roll-up sides. And even in our wind, they work out pretty darn well. And so I've got some line that crosses over that holds that down. So the wind doesn't do this to it. So you've got some line there, some soft line to hold it in place. And you can manipulate this on both sides. And I can keep that temperature very close to 85 degrees, just by how I raise or lower the sides. Lower them at night, raise them up a little bit. I know I'm going to be gone all day, I just raise them all the way up. But I can control it very closely. Those roll-up sides, you know, there's plus and minuses to them, but this is the best way for your air circulation, especially if you don't want to use electricity. And I'm trying to beat the grocery store prices. And I don't want just put a lot of money into it I don't need. Just roll the sides up and roll them down. By the end of the summer, I've got really strong triceps. So this was my first high tunnel, it's 14 by 20. And the first time I planted it, I outgrew it. So Murphy's Law, right? As soon as you plant your greenhouse, you'll grow it to get the biggest structure you can afford and pick the site. So when I walked in and I said, honey, I just outgrew the high tunnel, he's like, oh, no, because he was pretty convinced that the instructions were written in Ukrainian, translated into Chinese, back to Russian, into French, then to English. He said, they're some of the worst instructions we've ever seen. So this is, then I moved up.
Wow.
So I moved up. Walls of water. Walls of water.
Yeah.
Flexible cattle panel that's been bent into arches because I'm going to build it. Irrigation system, drip irrigation system. Some token raised beds.
Take a field trip to your house.
Yeah. Yeah, you can so compress the growing season, it's just amazing. This is what it looks like in July. Third week of September. So they're pretty magical, and air circulation is incredibly important. That's like your rule number one, is how are you going to get the air moved through this? So always be thinking about that. You know, are you going to lug electricity up there and have black spans, or you roll up the sides, or you have just have a fence? So how are you going to do that? How are you going to move that air through? So raised beds, and then there's the irrigation system in there, flexible cattle panels going up and over. She had all sorts of technology in there. Weather station in there, inside of it, the weather station outside of it. She was having fun. She was definitely fun with it. So I grew just tremendous amount of vegetables in there. And of course, the chairs crept in. I had a creature comfort. At some point, you need to sit down and go, I just want to watch you grow. Right? So this is hydroponic. This is one way to do hydroponic. And And the risk with this method is that you can really rot everything out very quickly. You can, a lot of root rot, photopera, other things can happen in there. But this was just a very, very clean little greenhouse. Huge production out of it, just really huge. And this was the greenhouse that had been a lizard house. And all the pots would be moved around, some of them were on wheels. Some stuff wasn't doing very well. Definitely some nutrition deficiencies going on with some of these pots, but they were able to keep the tomatoes going year round. Yeah. Okay. I'm an in-ground type person. And I still use black plastic inside my hydroponic. And they seem kind of like, oh, you're getting it hot enough in here, aren't you? And it's like, well, but not the soil. I want that soil hot. And so I run around with my little meat thermometer and I put it into the soil and I check the temperature. And I can get that happy temperature for those hot loving plants with that black plastic. So that's still needed even inside there. I throw everything up. Everything is on a drip irrigation system. I know I keep talking about the drip irrigation system, and we'll have that class, I think it's next week. But this is, I apologize for the dirt. It's not so dirty. I'll pass this around, and if you look closely at it, you will see the emitters. And so it'll go from kind of this kind of bumpy scale-like, and then all of a sudden there'll be like a little hole, more or less. I'll pass it around, and so the seam side is out. Flat side, seam side.
So is that a soaker hose or not?
This is drip.
Oh.
Yeah, soaker hose, you don't know exactly how much water is coming out of the soaker hose. It's a guess. You can put a little can underneath there and kind of say, well, at this spot, I'm getting a ½ inch an hour. But if you've got bees, soaker hose is awesome for your bees because now they've got a ready source of water. They can just land on it and pull water up through their proboscis and then and not drown. So it's really very good way to water your bees. The drip, I really want to water the soil and very specifically at the root zone. So that's where that drip comes in very. And I know exactly how much is coming out of each one of those little emitters. It should be like ½ a gallon an hour. So I can measure how much water this line, so if I tell it's 48 feet long, I got my staging area up front, so I've lost about 6 feet, so I got 42 feet long in there. And I can count all the emitters, or just know how many emitters is there. And I can tell how much water I'm using per line. And then for some plants, they want less, some want more. I can turn it off, I can turn it on. So I can really manipulate it. But that black plastic is really key in there too. I think that'd be too hot, but it's not. And again, I can roll these sides up and I can control that temperature pretty darn close. I've never had to put a box fan in there or move the air around. Just how I've got it lined up. North-south axis, wind comes in from the west. In the summer it switches around, but I still get enough airflow through here, but I don't have a lot of heat problems. So why is the heat a problem in here? And part of it is that when you get over 85 degrees, when you start getting up to like 90 degrees, 95 degrees, especially for tomatoes, that pollen loses its viability. And it sticks, clumps. And so the bees, your bumblebees are your best friends for tomatoes, can't move that. And then pollen, if it does make it to the female part of the plant, it's just a big clump. So the heat is still detrimental to the pollen. And the bumblebees at a certain temperature, they just stop flying altogether. So it's too hot for them. So that's why you don't, heat is not your best friend, humidity is not your best friend in a high tunnel. You really want to keep both of them within manageable ranges. So that's why it's really, really important. And then there's some other problems that come into plant problems with plant physiology when it gets too hot in there. And so the plants stop functioning. And tomatoes, if it gets too hot, they just sort of get hateful and say, I'm just going to drop my blossoms. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit here until my world is right again. And so temperature, excessive heat is not your best friend. So some construction details again. This is the chain link fence, steel. And so he's got this structure that is, ready for a force 4 hurricane. But on the outside, he just sort of has a strip, a plastic strip holding his plastic down. And so that's not optimal. So this is, let's see what I wear in my box. So the other way to hold this down, the plastic down, is with a channel. And you use wiggle wire. I just brought in a tiny piece of wiggle wire. It's usually about 8 feet long, and it's called wiggle wire. A little bit on this, but when you start putting it in that, it just starts doing this, and it's pretty dangerous. So it's called wiggle wire. If you just lock it in here with the plastic, it just holds it. It's very, very effective at holding this. Or the inexpensive method is just take another piece of wood or another piece of plastic and just put everything down together to get the wiggle wire wiggle. And then he also screwed his PVC pipe together too, which I'm not sure quite how well that works on PVC, but there it is.
Well named.
Mr. Jones.
So every high tunnel is going to be different, right? And it's kind of what design you fall in love with and what you want to put up. But everything you put into that should be some sort of component that helps maintain its rigidity and its structure and integrity. So on this one, this is the really for a year and it doesn't touch. Oh. So because this is a roll-up one and design's a little bit different, there's a board down at the base and that's screwed to the ribs. And so this is the kick board here. And that helps with rigidity at the base, but it also gives a place for the roll-up to come to a stop to rest on top of, so I can anchor it there. It also has what's called a hip board, even though it's kind of head height, it's a hip board. And then this other one up here is a purlin. And so they all add to the structural component that you want the tunnel to move. You want it to be rigid, you want it to move. But not so much that, you know, it comes apart. So these ribs are 4 foot on center that's been engineered that way. I've had someone go, well, I can take that 48 foot one and I can make it 72 feet long. And so they put it on different centers. And it really compromised the structural strength of it. They had problems. They had some really interesting problems. And so I've got pads between the metal and plastic just to help keep that plastic alive longer. And the roll-up sides. So I since took this one and I made it a whole 100 feet long. And it still had the roll-up sides 100 feet long. So like I said, by the end of the summer, something like this, you get pretty strong. It's actually pretty easy. Just a little tiny gearbox. Not very daunting to get it up. A little channel that it rides in.
You took your current one and you extended it longer?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I have some great pictures of that one. My neighbor came down and felt, he just thought that was the craziest thing. And I want it. This is more of a channel that's going around with the wiggle wire. And this is 2 layers of plastic, and this is what it looks like when it's held in it. And it's really, really effective at holding that plastic in place. So you never, ever had this come undone. And yet, when I have to remove this old plastic, the wiggle wire comes out really easy and the plastic just comes off. So it's not like I have to take staples out, screws out or anything. So it's easier to put in the beginning, and I think it's a little bit easier to take out. We have to replace that filter. Anchors. Everyone kind of has their own approach to this. So my husband's an engineer, so this got over-designed a little bit. So this here goes down 2 feet. And then a rib pops in there and it gets screwed into the kickboard. And my husband took a turnbuckle and he took a 2 foot long auger and drilled it down in there and took the turnbuckle and put that on it.
Was he bored?
It's not going anywhere.
How many of those go in along? Is it just at the corners or along, how many along the sides?
He did the whole length on both sides.
Because what would
So it looks like there's another one just at the top. It's about 4 or 6 feet between.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, but I've never had problems with the high tunnel. So this is a high tunnel from Farm Tech. So Farm Tech doesn't, you're in Iowa. So I said, we have winds out here to kind of go, really? We have wind here too. It's like, no, we have hurricane winds here. So, yeah. So this end here was just originally just the plastic sheets that came down and zippered. It didn't matter what I did with them. I wired them together. I took cinder blocks. And the wind would still unzip the whole thing. So it was like more of a wind tunnel, and the ends were flapping like this. So we built and framed again. So that's, you know, when you build a high tunnel, this is something you need to keep in mind, is that you're probably going to have to frame the ends in somehow, because of the wind. It doesn't matter how you align your high tunnel on your property. That wind is going to impact it some way. So how they do the ends is really important, just as much as the sides. And then of course, my creature comfort's in there, and it has changed over the years. And of course, at the end of the day, you sit down in the rocking chair, next thing you know, you're out cold. But, I had a cat and everywhere, and I had shelving in there, a table, and you can have a lot of fun with these. And this is it. The chair went from one end to the other end, and then the table morphed in there, and then there's Vanrock chairs over there. So you will eventually find that these chairs need to come in with you. And I'm gonna get that. Let's talk about one of these things here. So between these, so, it's like anything in life, right? It's a learning experience. So between each one of these ribs, I put this. This is kind of seat fill material. And I just took a 2x4 and I wrapped the 2x4 around it. And then I screwed it together, and then I screwed this into the kickboard. And then with some of my husband's fishing weights, I took a line and I would throw it over the top, and I get on the other side and I hoist this up. And so I took this strap in between each one of these ribs, and I strapped it down. And I strapped it down as tight and as hard as I could, just to keep, so otherwise the wind gets underneath there, and it just kind of does this. It just makes a lot of noise. It pops and it wears on the plastic really hard. And so by doing this between the ribs, I lengthened the life by easily another 2 years, just by strapping it down. And it also, it's kind of nerve-wracking to be in a high tunnel that's making a lot of noise. And so this eliminated the noise. This was kind of a lifesaver for both of us. So you can get on Untitled. Everywhere. I'm sure that there's a mega greenhouse and there's some other greenhouse companies, Hydroponics, Coral Springs. There's a lot of places where you can find that. So hydroponics, that's like a whole course unto itself. And I've taken some hydroponic courses and conferences, and that's a whole different, that's again a whole different world, and that's like a babysitting job. And sometime this summer we'll do a field trip out to Mike Keith's place where he's growing everything hydroponically. He's doing an ebb and flow method, and so it's very elaborate. But there's just no room for error. And so you have to become a chemist almost. And you want to make sure that you've got the right pH. You don't want the salts real high. Fertilizer's got to be well balanced. What media you decide to use, what method. There's just a whole different ways to do this. And of course, real world does not work. That's great for your petunias and geraniums, but yeah. Okay, and hydroponics, that really is the wave of the future. And this is old, but we can do more on 1 acre under glass hydroponically than you can do out in cornfields. And it'll be your tomatoes, your peppers, strawberries, your salad greens, all of those, the root crops, they have, I've seen some people try to do carrots hydroponically, and it doesn't quite work yet. But what they can do hydroponically is just phenomenal, just phenomenal. Okay, so that's my greenhouse story, my high tunnel. Sides are rolled up.
How hard is it to get the plastic over the top?
It's not that hard. Timing is everything, early in the morning. They have to have a crew of about 6. Their tunnel this big. And then again, you kind of put ties on the corners in the middle. And you throw those up and over, and then you kind of hoist it up. And you get big, strong guys to pull it tight, and you just wiggle wire in as fast as you can. But it takes maybe an hour to do that. And my husband did the small high tunnel by himself for 14 by 20. So I heard about that for about a month, but I get it. I get it.
How big of a high tunnel do you think you need to feed, like you and your husband?
Oh, the little one, 14 by 20.
Okay.
Yeah, the
This
big,
one is for giggles.
well, there's a lot of work.
Yeah.
The big one, the one that was 48 feet long, I figured I could feed about 20 people. And then the 100-foot long one, it doesn't quite work out, doubling. That was probably another 30 people. I could feed out of that. But that's if I was continuously giving you vegetables. Plus, I was selling vegetables at the farmer's market. And I had a couple CSAs, and I was driving up and down the neighborhood, doing stuff. Yeah, that's crazy. You can do a lot. But it is a whole different set of rules. Yeah.
Do you have any experience with low tunnels?
Yes. Yeah, I was doing.
How much extra length of time do you get with the low tunnel?
With the low tunnels, so that's kind of a tunnel within a tunnel. And sometimes they're called caterpillars. Sometimes they're inside, sometimes they're outside. Depends what you want to do with them. They've done both in and out. And I can go inside the high tunnel. I can go year round with a low tunnel inside the high tunnel.
But just the high tunnel or low tunnel by itself outside? Get a few extra weeks on either side?
Yeah, easily. Probably a month on either side. Yeah.
How about floating roof covers? Can you extend your season a little bit just by themselves or not?
I haven't had a lot of luck with floating roof, but yeah, they usually like to blow off. They'll hold off a light frost, but they won't hold off at 27-degree frost. So I'll get maybe an extra week on either side with those guys. Yeah, so the cool thing in a high tunnel is you can do, what I would do towards the end of the season is I'd cover this with plastic, with another layer of plastic. So I would have a high tunnel, a low tunnel within the high tunnel. And then I had another low tunnel that was maybe about yay big that went over my salad greens and my herbs. And I managed to get those guys the whole year. Yeah, I had bugs. I had aphid issues. I'm talking with some of my colleagues. It's like, yeah, that's normal.
Somebody mentioned about getting your pollinators. Do you have any trouble getting pollinators in there? Did you answer that question? Or did I miss that?
If you're closed all the way around, so you just have vents, you're trying to blow the air through, it's really hard. So you can buy bumblebees to go in there. But when I leave the sides open like this, I don't have any problems. I have problems with birds getting in now and then. And Yeah. But the honeybees, you don't want to do honeybees inside a high tunnel. They get really, really confused by the light. And so they fly to the top and they bang around on the top, horribly disorientated. They finally get exhausted and just die. So honeybees in there don't work. And even the bumblebees would get confused. So I was always rescuing bumblebees. I'm not horribly squeamish or scared of much stuff. So I would catch the bumblebees, take them out. And I'd get the orchard masons stuck in there, and I'd catch them and toss them out. But the roll-up sides really make a big difference on what the pollinators in and out. It's pretty magical. Once you get up and running with them, I mean, it's just amazing what you can do. The produce that can come out of one of them is just phenomenal. Yeah.
The mechanism to roll up, it's just like a crank, like an old fashioned automobile crank or something like that.
You could probably do that.
But you didn't have any pictures of actually the mechanism we used.
It's just a simple gearbox,
But how do you turn the gearbox?
big long crank. Big long
A long crank,
crank, and you just,
like an arm, a wrench extender kind of crank that you just go like this.
no, not like this, it's just like that. Yeah. See if I can remember to do that with that.
Yeah.
There was a
I
picture
saw a picture of the
somewhere,
box, but
yeah.
I didn't see what you used to.
There,
There
is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so you see this? The little
Oh,
sugar
that's the
strip,
crank, okay. I
Yeah.
understand that.
that comes out, that's about 4 feet long. It's about 5 feet long. And so the handle has got a roller on it. So you can turn it. The handle just rolls in your hand, but the whole thing operates this little tiny gearbox. I mean, it's just a little tiny gearbox. And I can put it down pretty easy.
Can you do it by yourself, or do you have to have somebody on either side doing it with you?
I just do it by myself.
So it's just on one side?
Yep.
Oh,
So when you put this plastic on, it's really important that it's all uniform, because you can see back here, it's a little higher. And so it wasn't quite smooth. And
it's kind of like a blind.
yeah,
way you can-
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But going in that channel, then it doesn't really blow up too much when you have these 100-mile-an-hour wind days, whether it's 7 up.
I had a lot of bungee cords.
Over the whole top.
Yeah, I bungee cord that down in the winter.
Okay,
And I winterize this thing.
okay.
And that's why these straps go over at each rib. And so it goes over at each rib, and then it's anchored down here at this kickboard. Yeah.
Yes, so we've heard about air circulation and temperature. So if you kept the temperature where you wanted it, 80, 85 degrees, air circulation wouldn't really be important, would it? As long as it doesn't get too hot.
Right, but you still need that air circulation in there to keep things
Okay.
stirred up.
Yeah. All right, the reason I'm asking, so I'm in the process of building this bee hut. So it's to keep the bees inside during the winter time. And what I did was I built a heat sump. So to take the ambient temperature of the earth, which is about 55 degrees, and I put PVC pipe underneath and ran it up to the surface. And then with solar, you can put a little fan just to circulate that air. It's just a small one. It's like 10 by 12 feet. So it's nothing really big, nothing like these. So I'm thinking that would work for them, but it wouldn't be warm enough.
There's a high tunnel here that's up about 7,200 feet. built on that same premise. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's, I've got pictures of it, I don't show it at the class because this is a lot of material, but that other method is really complicated, it's a whole heat sump system where. Oh, let's see. There's a fan in here,
Mhm. Yep, that's exactly it.
and then there's, and this is a tri-tunnel greenhouse really, because it's permanent. So all these, and this is all interconnected, and there's many of them. And so this fan, these fans in here circulate the air. In this case, we're heating the soil. So the soil line is here. So you have plants growing up on top of it. I've seen it in full production. Just hundreds of pounds of tomatoes, you know. Holy buckets. But it's all on the premise of this, taking this warm earth and doing this heat exchange thing. So it's just a big circulating thing.
Probably heat it in the winter, cool it in the summer.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. It's pretty elaborate. I watched the builder, got all sorts of great pictures. I got to
You
see.
work the soils in a high tunnel when vegetation is over.
I pull everything out. I try to pull everything out.
Turn the soil at all.
I
You
just-
do dry compost, composting or.
I'll do full composting in there. And then I'll do layers of stuff in the spring, early spring, I'll do layers of like grass clippings and leaves, straw, and whatever else my soil test has come up with. And then I let my husband loose with the rototiller, and he gets 2 laps.
He's got a quota, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you can only do 2 laps. So, yeah, that's, they're pretty magical once you get going with them and you get it figured out. It's real easy to go upside down, but once you get it figured out, you know, don't put manures in the soil, make your own fertilizer, grow your own plants. It's so easy to grow vegetables from seed. Tomatoes germinate 5 days. Peppers are a little persnickety. They could be 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Okra, well, it's just like a weed. Those who like okra, like plants, it's all easy to start from seed. The only thing I don't recommend starting from seeds is onions. Just direct sow those guys. Winter squash, just and pumpkins, I just direct sow all that stuff. So it's just really easy. Corn, I put corn in there 1 year. Well, I've grown corn in a number of years. And feathers, rototill 200 chickens worth of feathers into the soil 1 year. My gosh, I had corn that was 13 feet tall and tops, like 9 inches. Yeah. Sunflowers in there, you name it. I tried to grow everything there. Artichokes, peanuts do really well in or out of the high tunnel. Well, you're not going to get Georgia type crops. Where's my Georgia and Texas people? Yeah, you're going to get kind of a token. This is a peanut plant. I think peanuts on
I can identify this.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I have for tonight. So thanks for putting up with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My husband never considered that. We're still removing critical species, and it's been the 3rd year, so high tower could be a 10-year project.
I know about lawn projects. I still have works in progress that have been going on for about 10 years. Very slow progress.
He is not an outdoors kind of guy, so I'm the outdoors person, but I have got to remove juniper roots, because those are, yeah. He's got a system down for that, but we go slow. Yeah, I have to